on this episode of Rebel Spirit Radio.
Because I really think true healing is actually resilience.
Yeah.
The more resilience we have, the truth is, the more that we are going to get tested. So we're going to have bigger and bigger initiations. I can tell you from personal experience. I'm sure you can speak to that as well, that we're just going to keep getting initiated because, this earth, from what I understand from my teacher, my Bwiti father, Atum Rabenga, who's passed, he says that earth is a school, that we come here. This is like the highest level university in the cosmos. It's very hard. It's like, the Ivy Leagues of planetary teachings, but you gotta face some stuff.
Welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio, exploring the frontiers of spirituality, consciousness, the esoteric, and humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. I'm your host, Nick Mather, and in this episode I'm joined by Tricia Eastman, a renowned speaker, artist, and founder of the nonprofit Ancestral Heart, to discuss her book, Seeding Consciousness, which combines indigenous wisdom, alchemical traditions, and depth psychology. She explains her emphasis on the importance of conscious intention, developing a relationship with plant spirits, and the necessity of self-healing and resilience. Also, please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to or view podcasts. Your support is truly appreciated. Tricia Eastman, a lineage-honoring medicine woman and founder of the nonprofit Ancestral Heart, has curated transformative retreats with plant medicines worldwide, as well as facilitated the psycho-spiritual program with Ibogaine and 5-MeO-DMT at Crossroads Treatment Center in Mexico. A renowned speaker, artist, and writer, Eastman has engaged with audiences at Stanford University, the World Economic Forum, and on Gaia TV's Psychedelica. Her wellness retreat center, Hugh Azores, on São Miguel Island, Portugal, is scheduled to open in 2025. She joins me today to discuss her book, Seeding Consciousness, Plant Medicine, Ancestral Wisdom, and Psychedelic Initiation. Tricia, welcome to Rebel Spirit Radio.
Such an honor to be here and just really delighted for this conversation and to connect with you. Just really love everything that you've shared with me about your work. And consciousness is what it's all about, seeding the consciousness. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And thank you. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. I read a lot of books for the podcast, as you might imagine, a lot of books. And, I enjoy them mostly, but I really liked your book. I found it very relevant to my own experiences. So it's one that I will recommend highly to people. And I love how you bring together a few different aspects, the indigenous wisdom traditions, the alchemical tradition. There's a little bit of depth psychology, I would say, that's in there as well. And you never say this outright, but there also seems to be a little bit of the Western magical tradition in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, I found it was an amazing read. But before we get into the book, I thought that it might be helpful if you could talk a little bit about your background and your personal journey. What led you to working with plant medicines?
Well, first of all, just what you shared, I was trying to keep myself from tearing up. Thank you. Really the way that I got into this work was, deep ancestral trauma, deep suffering, father with schizophrenia, who attempted suicide, really being terrified of psychedelics because of that, thinking that it could trigger potentially the same thing within myself. It was actually cannabis that triggered the episode where my father attempted suicide and was diagnosed schizophrenic. So, fast forward down the line, I'm 28 years old. I'm 44 now. And I have a traumatic brain injury, which I don't realize I have. One thing we're learning now in science is what traumatic brain injuries can do in terms of changing the way that your mind works, really doing massive damage in terms of being able to access certain parts of the brain, triggering massive anxiety. And it essentially did that to me without me being aware of it. So here I am in this state where, like, I'm all of a sudden my brain isn't functioning. I have all this anxiety, and I'm like, what do I do? So, the only thing I could do was self-soothe with alcohol. And I panicked. I went to the doctor. I said, I can't even public speak in front. And this was something I was doing on a regular basis. I was working in the wellness industry. I spent the first, decade of my working life consulting in the spa and wellness industry, working with like Ritz-Carlton Group and all of these like high-end, like Canyon Ranch Spa Group. And here I am. I can't even stand in front of people at a spa conference and talk about something that I know more than the back of my hand. And I'm like having a meltdown. And the psychotherapist, who was one of the top from the University of Washington Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, was like, "Oh, you're just like a breed of Chihuahua. It's just your temperament being anxious." And
Mm.
obviously, I did not feel seen in this situation. And instead, I felt even more of a panic in the
Mm.
sense like, you mean I have to be like this for the rest of my life? So that's when I rediscovered my friend MDMA, which back in my raver days, I worked at a counterculture bookstore in Seattle called Raver Books and on Pike Street, and, like read all the classics, Ram Dass, Tikal, Fikal, all of, the psychedelic books. And, now here I am, many years later, thanks to MDMA in the space myself. So essentially, I went back to the MDMA, started taking it, had this kind of freak mystical experience, like an unplanned, unintended result, which I've never had from MDMA. I mean, like when I would do it at raves, there would be times where, like, after the party, I might be in reflection laying in bed and all of a sudden be like, I need to forgive my stepfather, or, things like that, where I was like doing my own therapeutic work without thinking about it. But this was truly a mystical experience for me. And the insight that I got from it was that I wasn't living my proper path, that I was off track, that it wasn't what I was doing was wrong. It just wasn't me.
Mm.
And so I told my husband, I was married, and I said, I need to find myself. I need to go and go on this journey, take time off and find myself. And I invited him to come along, and he said, I can't see that happening for at
Mm.
least 5 years. So I literally left my life, left my husband, left my houses actually, because I was really good at business when I was younger. I used to like buy real estate, and I was like, this is going to be my retirement when I get old. So I managed to buy like 4 houses by the time I was 28, which would never happen nowadays in this modern world. And so then I went from that to almost being a sadhu,
Mm.
like, nothing but the clothes on my back, traveling through Europe, really just focused on meditation and spiritual practice. And I found this book that was called Plant Spirit Medicine, and it was all about the spirits of plants. And at the
Mm.
time, I was open to kind of some of these more metaphysical things. I was at the time enrolled in a mystery school, but it wasn't necessarily something that I fully understood from like a Gnostic perspective where I had experienced it
Mm.
firsthand. But it seemed like it made sense. And there was a plant in there called ayahuasca, a psychedelic plant. And I immediately felt this draw that I needed to work with this plant. But I also felt terrified because I'm like, I would not like just go off to the jungle in Peru or Brazil or Ecuador and just show up and expect to meet an ayahuasquero or curandera and just be like, okay, you're the one that's supposed to serve me ayahuasca. And so, interestingly, I managed to find myself in Venice Beach, California, at a place called Cafe Gratitude, which
Yes.
is you've heard of it before.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
I've
like,
been to it was in Berkeley. There was a Cafe Gratitude, and then they had another one in LA, not the one on Venice Beach. But
uh-huh.
I've got their cookbook.
Oh, I need the cookbook. I mean, every dish is an affirmation. I love
Mhm.
how when the server comes up to the table, they're like, "What are you grateful for?"
Yeah.
And, it just gets you into that space of like contemplation and opening your heart. So here I am sitting around the table with these new friends of mine. And one of the friends is like, "We're going to be sitting in the Hollywood Hills doing an ayahuasca ceremony this weekend." And I'm like, "You can do that in the Hollywood Hills?" Like kind of
Mm.
surprised. And essentially, an Ecuadorian curandero was visiting, or actually, technically, taita would be the
Mm.
proper word, a
Mm.
taita. And they invited me to join. So I did. And it was an incredible experience, which really changed the context of, looking at psychedelics from the standpoint of being this recreational drug that I saw in dare commercials does damage to the brain, to something that was a sacred tradition that was honored for thousands of years, and that there was a technology, a spiritual technology, and a way of engaging with spirits. And I would say that it was the first time that I had really vivid, visionary, mystical
Mm.
experience with a psychoactive substance. Probably the highest dose that I'd ever taken, because obviously, when you're going to a rave and you're dancing, you're not. Taking a heroic dose of mushrooms,
Right.
or, a heroic dose of anything. You're just
Yeah.
kind of taking it to enhance the environment. So fast forward a couple years, I meet this guy, Martin Polanco, who owns a clinic in Mexico doing Ibogaine.
Mm.
Ibogaine is an extract from the plant Iboga. Iboga is from equatorial Africa, and it's used in ceremonial rites of initiation in the
Mm.
Bwiti tradition. And I read a lot of information about it. I see that it's highly risky, it's
Mm.
highly difficult. You can die from
Mm.
taking it. So I definitely have a healthy respect for it. And I sit down with Dr. Martine. This was 2014. And I say, I've struggled with eating disorders my entire life. And really, when I left my husband, I stopped drinking. I went on this journey. And one of the things I decided was that I wanted to heal my eating disorders once and for all. Well, it didn't happen.
Mm.
I did everything under the sun, and I just couldn't get down to the center. It was like whatever was in there was so stuck that I couldn't get to it. And so, in my experience of working with Abigail, I was invited to the clinic shortly after meeting Dr. Martine. And so, like, literally weeks later, I'm in the clinic. And again, one of the most profound experiences in terms of mystical, visual, and just Gnostic understandings.
Mm.
And in that experience, I truly learned what it was to remove that sense of separation, to really remove that sense of being separate as another. Like, I could see God in other people. I just
Mm.
couldn't see God in myself in the way that I could
Mm.
see it in other people. And so in that, I just cried in gratitude, and I said to the plant, like, how can I be of service to you?
Mm.
And that is what triggered everything.
Yeah.
Literally, I got asked to work at the clinic within a few weeks. At the exact same time, my partner, Dr. Joseph Barsulia, who's a psychologist, became a psychedelic researcher at the clinic.
Mm.
We had met separately outside of that. So, I mean, there was so much synchronicity in
Mm.
everything. And we started our path together, really supporting each other in this work, going to Gabon, getting initiated in the tradition. I've done 5 initiations in my lineage of Fang Bwiti, and then also one initiation in Gonde Mesoko Bwiti, which are different
Mm.
branches of the tradition. And really, I just decided that there's nothing else greater to devote my life to than this work. And so, really that led to at first wanting to make this accessible for so many people,
Mm,
knowing the healing that unlocked for me, that if that could unlock for other people, which, when I worked at Crossroads, Martin Polanco started a program where he started working with special ops veterans.
mm,
So I got to work with Navy SEALs
mm,
and Green Beret and all of these, deeply traumatized, but also like deeply gifted individuals that really started a movement. I watched many of these people start organizations that have really led the way towards changes in legislation,
mm,
especially because psychedelics have been on the more democratic side historically. And now I feel like it's less of a political issue. Like it's become
mm.
even maybe more Republican or at least equally Republican, which is super exciting. This is a really cool time that we're in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting times. I will give you that. It's very
Hmm.
interesting times. And I was thinking about that while reading your book because, and a lot of people have said this, and a lot of people who work with the medicines have said that we are in an initiatory process,
Hmm.
that we are in a death and rebirth process. And it really, for the first time, I always kind of understood that intellectually, but for the first time recently, I started feeling it in my heart and in my gut.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, here we go. Here we go. And I think, and I don't know if you feel like this, but it seems to me that these medicines are becoming better known and more widespread now at precisely the time that we need
Yeah, I actually say in my book this that, really in our human history, this is the first time that we've had access to every healing
Yeah.
modality,
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
every medicine, for you to have access to Kundalini yoga, to
Mm.
have access to Mayan cacao and
Right.
ceremonial cacao, to have Chinese medicine, acupuncture, like I could go on and list all of the different modalities and knowledge systems that you have access to, as where many of the masters of these lineages historically have maybe been lucky to have access to one lineage.
Right.
And I truly believe that all these tools have come to meet us. Like ayahuasca came out of the jungle
Yeah.
to the west. All the medicines came out of the jungles to allow us to arise. And I think that there's a really important mission that we have. I think the first is humanity's collective collaboration, our
Mm.
unification. But I think also more importantly, which I think ties in with it, is our stewardship of
Mm.
nature.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So let me ask you, you mentioned that one of the things that propelled you on this path was reading that book, Plant Spirit Medicine.
Hmm.
Has your experience with the plant medicines been that there is a spirit to them?
I would say 100% yes. And if you look at the, Maua traditions within the Shipibo lineage, I think it's one of the most prime examples where the Shipibo are on these dietas where they
Mhm.
literally sit with every plant in the jungle. And it's
Mhm.
usually, they're working with a master of the lineage, and that master prescribes specific plants for specific things. For
Mhm.
example, bobinsana is a really beautiful plant for opening the heart. And working with these plants, you get visuals that are connected to a story of that plant. I almost think of it as the archetypal patterns in the Matrix, kind of like in the movie The Matrix, how the ones and zeros
Yeah.
were coming down. It's like kind of like its energetic signature. And then every plant has a song.
Mm.
And then every
Yeah.
plant has some kind of spirit, and that spirit can reveal itself in color, like as an orb. It can reveal itself in some kind of physical form, and they all have different essences. And what's interesting is the more that you build a relationship with plants, they become part of your team. So
Mm.
it's like, in a lot of spiritual traditions, there's talks of the idea of spiritual guides
Mm,
or spiritual counsels that, when you're in meditation, you have access to. And a lot of that can be connected to ancestors. Like in Bwiti, we connect with the ancestors in the work that we do. But what I would say is plants are very much part of that. And they are essentially a doctor, a
mm,
teacher, something that is always there on your side that's going to help you. And what's so interesting that I've found in my journeys is that every plant that I purely work with and set the intention to build that relationship shapes every future experience that I have,
mm,
meaning that when I've had mushroom experiences before I worked with Iboga, now that Iboga is part of my team, there are some very Iboga aspects that
mm,
come through distinctively every time I connect with medicine. The
mm,
two medicines I'm most deeply connected with are 5-MeO DMT
mm.
and Iboga. So
Yeah.
those two really come through very strong for me in terms of being part of my field. And I feel like even if I'm in, a ceremony, obviously outside of the country where it's legal, and I am working with someone, those parts of my team, parts of my council also will be working with me.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. And it's getting legal some places. It's here in Colorado. They
Yeah.
passed the law a couple years ago. Not for everything, but I know that DMT, psilocybin, those were all on the list. Not MDMA, I don't believe. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I just wanted to ask that question because I've worked with someone who was blessed to bring ayahuasca to the north. He works with
Mm.
Shipibo shamans. Spent like 10 years working with them, and he and
Wow.
his partner have this amazing, it's not even a center, but they go to various places where they can.
Mm.
And it's been interesting for me because ayahuasca, DMT within the brew is
Mhm.
supposed to be incredibly psychoactive. I have never had any kind of visionary experience at all. And what I have learned is, well, one is the next time I attend one of these ceremonies, I need to ask for the big cup. And number
Mm.
two is what came to me was you have to learn to work with the plant,
Yeah.
that you can't have these expectations going in because the first time I worked with the medicine, I thought, oh, this is going to fix me and it's going to fix me good and I'm going to be good to go. And that is not the way these things work. And you talk about this a bit in the book that you have
Mhm.
to develop this relationship with them.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I really love what you shared, and I would say that, I mean, the experiences are so different
Mm,
from person to person, and it can be so many different things. It can be mercury and toxins that are built
mm,
up in the body. It can be how you're breathing.
mm,
Like if you're someone who is a shallow breather, that can kind of inhibit the medicine from really like moving
mm,
and getting the channels within the body open to allow the medicine to really work. It can be being stuck in the head. It can be dosage. It can be the blend. I mean, there's so
yeah,
many different things. And then sometimes people just need physical healing. And I would
yeah,
say that's kind of just the baseline
yeah,
of what
yeah.
the medicine's going to do. And this is why in initiatory traditions, you do a lot of cleansing
Mm,
rituals.
right.
And those cleansing rituals help to kind of take those layers off of the emotional body and the physical healing so that you can get into the mystical experience. And I would
Mm,
say that there's definitely a recipe for the mystical experience, but it's not always
yeah.
necessarily something that's guaranteed. And I know I got a little off base. Please forgive me. Refresh me on the other part of the question. I just wanted to address that part because I think that's really important to say.
Oh, I don't remember now. Well, I was asking about the working with the medicine. Getting to know the spirit in the plant
Yes.
because like I said, my what I learned was a couple of things. One, the very first time I did a retreat working with the medicine, it manifested for me outwardly in a very
Mm-hmm.
strange way. And what I took away with me was this is supernatural. There's something very
Mm-hmm.
supernatural about this medicine. And I've done it a couple other times but again, never had any of the visionary sort of things. But
Mm-hmm.
the approach that I took is, and this was what was recommended, is just have faith that the medicine is doing what it needs to be doing.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you can never really know. I mean, there's people that I've known since I started that have never had visions. And, oh, I remember what I was going to share with you because I was going off on this other side of things, but there was something else I wanted to add in that, you were talking about the DMT
Mm,
and the idea of how it works on the body. And one thing I will share that a lot of people don't know, there's a really cool book called Alchemically Stoned,
mm,
and it talks about all of the different lineages that were even older, like basically all of the ancient traditions. When we think about like Kaikian and Soma, like what were they using in these brews? It was Syrian rue
mm,
and acacia,
mm,
which contains DMT. And
right.
so, this particular way of working with the medicine has been around the longest. It's probably because it was used in Europe. It was used around Africa, all around, all of Asia, like pretty much the entire world. And the only lineage that really has kept this tradition is in South America, but I believe that it is the thing that is the closest to our roots,
Mm,
and it's endogenous to our bodies. I mean,
yeah.
our bodies make 5-MeO-DMT, our
Mm,
bodies make NN-DMT. We can actually get into these states through breath work. And I would even say that doing things like Kundalini yoga and holotropic breathwork can be really great ways to start to open those channels. And the more that you work with those channels, the more that you're going to get out of the experience. So, like if you look at someone who comes into the ceremony and they haven't done any kind of preparation work, it's going to be much harder for them. They're going to feel more uncomfortable. You might be stuck in your head more. But once you have really built those practices, maybe you're already meditating, maybe you
mm,
already have your daily practices, it makes it so much easier to
yeah.
really receive the medicine. And that may not determine still whether you
Right.
have visionary
Yeah.
experience, but
Yeah.
it really helps.
Yeah. I don't know if the visionary experience is the point. It's nice, I suppose, but I think the point's the healing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I would say, even on the side, the point is healing. And also, like beyond that, that we're stepping into our highest level of
Yeah.
our creative empowerment.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when we're on our creative path, the healing comes up as a side effect.
Mm,
And I feel that I just never, like, I don't think you have this intention when you say this in any way whatsoever, but I just want to speak to everyone who is listening that some people come to the medicine because they think it's going to end suffering, which
mm,
is not the nature of reality.
right.
And I think that's where, the idea of healing and what
Mm,
healing really means, because I really
mm,
think true healing is actually resilience. The
yeah.
more resilience we have, the truth is, the more that we are going to get tested. So we're
Mhm,
going to have bigger and bigger initiations. I can tell
mhm,
you from personal experience. I'm
yeah.
sure you can speak to
Yeah.
that as well, that we're just going to keep getting initiated because,
Mhm,
this earth, from what I understand from my teacher, my Bwiti father, Atum Rabenga, who's passed, he says that earth is a school, that we
mhm,
come here. This is like the highest level university in the cosmos. It's very hard.
yeah.
It's like, the Ivy Leagues of planetary teachings, but,
Yeah.
you gotta face some stuff.
Yeah. My ayahuasquero, Drew, and his partner Stormy, that's what they say. They tell everyone that you will be tested. And they say that after the ceremony, it comes pretty quickly that you will be tested. So I can vouch for that very much,
Mhm.
very, very much. But I was going to ask you what seeding consciousness is, but you have already kind of gotten into it a little bit by speaking about our creativity and our creative
Mhm.
power. And so I do want to talk about that, but maybe for the listeners, we should start with the title, the seeding consciousness, and
Mm.
what is meant by that.
So I will tell you the story behind it because I just think it's really beautiful. So when I was really listening to this, titling, because the book came to me, I was in Gabon in an
Mm,
initiation in a chamber, and the Fang tradition of Bwiti believe that their roots are from the ancient Egyptian
mm,
mystery schools. And so it's believed in these lineages that the temples such as the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber were actually different types of initiatic chambers where you would go into solitude for long periods of time depending on the type of initiation. So that's what I was in. I was in a 7-day solitude chamber, and the chamber is called Mimbara, and Mimbara is the school of Ma'at. Ma'at is the Egyptian goddess of justice.
mm,
She is also the goddess that when you cross through the duat, she weighs your heart against the
mm,
feather, and if your heart weighs more than the feather, you're not allowed to cross through. So the laws of Ma'at are essentially the original principles that allow you to have a light heart so that
mm,
you can cross through the duat. And a lot of
mm,
it, I believe, comes through these initiations. So as I'm looking at this body of work that took a lot of time to really get right because it was a lot of weaving of different worlds and experiences, and also a responsibility of integrity, permissions, and representing things in a way that, knowing that there can be these downstream effects when you share things that can cause problems,
mm,
including, the deforestation of equatorial Africa for illegal market use of plant for the plant Iboga, because it might drive interest. You have to think about so many different things. So as I'm meditating on the title, I had just been with Alex and Allison. I was speaking at World Economic Forum, and we were all together and we spent like a week together, and I just fell in love with them. And the thing I really fell in love with was that Alex is a true embodiment. He's a profound, like prolific artist, as is
mm,
Allison, a couple in sacred union, in true
mm,
sacred union, with just deep love and reverence and respect and devotion in their relationship. And he has been a deep Tibetan Buddhist meditator who has really, gone through a lot of life changes that he talks about related to that. And he had made a post about this idea of the Tibetan sponge grawl. And the
mm.
Tibetan sponge grawl, which I'm really familiar with because of Padman, I can't even say it now, Padma Sambhava,
Yeah.
who is the founder of the Dzogchen tradition. And he, spent his time in a cave in darkness
Mm,
where he confronted his demons. And a lot of his statues in the monasteries have just the most crazy eyes.
mm,
And you look at them, and it's like there's truly an entity, a divine being, like you get this light transmission. And I've met masters that have this type of energy, and they've been Bwiti masters, they've been Kogi masters, they've been Tibetan masters. And what's interesting is they themselves become a transmission, almost like a book of
mm,
knowledge, just within the light in their
mm,
eyes. And they also have created works of art, and those works of art too become a transmission of, the consciousness for which they've cultivated within themselves. And so the idea of this Tibetan sponge grawl is that you receive a seed of consciousness by viewing the art that awakens something in you. So it isn't necessarily an instantaneous change in consciousness. It is a change in consciousness, but it's something that flowers over time. And
Mm,
had you not interacted with this deified statue or this piece of work, you wouldn't have received that transmission that opened that up
mm,
within you. And so, I truly believe that we all have that duty
mm.
to become that within ourselves. Not everyone has that capacity. We all have a lot of trauma at the
Yes.
same time,
Yeah.
but that refinement of really being in pure devotion to be selfless and to essentially keep on the path of truly facing yourself, to refine yourself into that work of art, to make
Mm,
art in the work that you do, whether it's writing books, whether it's making podcasts, whether it's teaching, but also to do that within yourself, to plant that seed within yourself through your practice. And I think also, it's really important to note that the way that we seed our consciousness is through subconscious work.
yeah.
And subconscious work is the work of inner alchemy, is the work of meditation, all the work with the subconscious mind. We are tending the garden of our own consciousness. And the reason that the ocean, I believe, because I believe in alchemy, in the emerald tablets, there are the laws, which are like as above so below.
Mm,
Well, if you look at our ocean and you look
yeah.
at Jungian psychology, our ocean is a representation of the subconscious, and our ocean is polluted.
Mm,
It's full of plastic, it's full of waste. And so I do believe that there is something symbolic to us within our own consciousness, tending to our consciousness, and how that will actually manifest
mm.
into our stewardship of the planet at the same time. We wouldn't be putting plastic in the ocean. We wouldn't be polluting. We wouldn't be letting companies do that if
Mm.
we were in our full awareness of understanding what that's doing to humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. You write in the book something that I've been saying for years now, and I always call it the addition of as above, so below, but it's
Yeah.
as within, so without.
Yes.
And that everything, like you just mentioned, the ocean and the pollution in the ocean, that is representative of us. And, with the ocean, it can be the unconscious, but everything that we see in the world is a reflection of the state of our souls. And
Yes.
one of the things that you wrote, and I loved this, and it was because you have a chapter on the sun and then one on the moon,
Mm-hmm.
and the sun is connected with ego and elemental fire.
Yeah.
And you made the connection of climate change, that the
Mhm.
planet's heating up. And it's like, yes. And that is so much because of this ego. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you for saying that because yeah, it's like and what's beautiful about it, on the other side of the coin, if we can come back to our relationship with fire,
Yeah.
true elemental fire, then we can transform that.
Mm, yeah. And the way to do that is through the moon. Is that correct? Or, yeah.
So the moon is connected to our inner waters, our psyche, our subconscious, but it's also connected to the more yin aspects
Mm.
of self. And, there's a couple ways of looking at it. It was really funny. After I wrote the book, I came across Ian McGilchrist's
Oh, yeah.
work. And I love like his work where he really talks about it in terms of the left and right hemisphere of the
Mm,
brain, because that's essentially what it is. And the reality is like here we are thinking that we're really smart when we're pretty much just focused on the left side of the brain, and we're blocking the mystical, we're blocking the imaginal,
mm,
the symbolic mind, we're discrediting it in our culture, but our true genius is the two coming together. And if you look at people like Einstein, which I
mm,
actually talk about at the end of the chapter, he had one of the most well-developed corpus callosum, which means,
mm,
he wasn't just a scientific genius. The reason he had such great ideas is because he played music and he was
Mm.
doing the arts and he was taking time in nature. And it was the combination of the two together that created the genius. And so I think, really in the time that we're in now, if you even look at the left and right hemisphere of the brain, we're talking about Atlantis. Atlantis as an ancient concept because obviously a lot of our ancient history has been destroyed. Those Salem witch trials, the burning
Oh
of
yeah.
books, the Library of Alexandria.
Mm.
Now we're finally having, things reemerging like the Gospel of Thomas
Mhm.
and all of these other ancient texts that were like buried in jars in Egypt that are becoming uncovered. And then you look at the indigenous traditions, which I feel is more like the Lumerian
Yeah.
consciousness, which is more of like this feminine way of being connected to the cycles of nature, being connected to the planetary bodies, the different stars, which are different archetypes. And through this bridging of the two together, through this merging of the two together, working symbiotically, I think is how we're going to emerge from
Yeah.
where we are. And that's why the plants had to
Yeah.
come in.
Yeah, I was looking in my notes. I was trying to find a quote, and I don't know if I can find the exact quote. So I will just do a best as I can. But one part of the book, towards the end, and this gets in with the creativity aspect as well, you
Mm.
noted that the majority of people who come to work with you are coming because they feel kind of like trapped in their lives, I think, and
Mm-hmm.
that money is always an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can, correct me there, but that's something that I see so prevalent in our world right now. And
Mm-hmm.
I know it's something that I struggle with as well. It's this idea that there's this feeling that we can't be creative
Mm-hmm.
because the social structures that we're in won't allow us to do so.
Yeah. Well, it's because we've lived in this society that has really essentially, this is how I explain it in my book. In 2017, I created a course. I taught it in New York at the assemblage. I taught it all over the US called The Psychedelics of Money.
Mm,
And the idea of the psychedelics of money is that when you look at all the metaphysical principles, the reality is we're all multidimensionaires.
mm,
And multidimensionaires means that the level of wealth that we have is beyond measure and it's in so many different dimensions, but we're really kind of shortchanging ourselves because we're so
mm,
focused on this like 3D money.
mm,
And the way that, the money has become the Negredo in
mm,
alchemy, the fixed thing, is because as a society, we've accepted that. We've accepted that. But if you really look at the metaphysics of money, the things that actually represent what money is in our society, because we used to be gold backed and we're not
right.
gold backed anymore, it's emotions,
Mm,
communication, and life force energy.
mhm,
And those things we all have control over. You have control over your emotions to some extent. You have
mhm,
control over your life force by doing things to take care of yourself and be healthy. If you have a high life force energy, your field actually allows you to create and manifest better.
mm,
And not everyone, I mean, a lot of people have chronic illnesses. They're more prevalent in our society. But the reality is that we have all of these three things. And what happens is when we break free from this idea that we need $1 million to build this project, this dream that we have, or even if it's 100,000 or 10,000 or $1,000, we get so fixated on these things that we don't actually tap into our true creativity. And the reality is, when you get too fixed on something, just like fixed on having visions in a psychedelic
right.
experience, you shortchange the possibility.
Yeah.
And the reality is, the beauty is in the mystery.
Mm,
And there's this saying I love from Yogi Bhajan, which is, I don't believe in miracles, I rely on them.
Mm,
And so for me, like the only way to truly bring miracles into reality is by truly trusting the mystery.
mm,
And that comes with like a deep curiosity and a deep creative orientation within yourself that's like, show me how this can be done.
yeah.
Like talk to your plant guides, talk to your ancestors, all of these ancient traditions that, truly our profound healing modalities are all animistic,
Mm,
meaning that the core basis of them is that everything is alive, that you should talk to a tree. And it's so interesting. I talk about this in the book because our culture is animistic in the sense that we let children personify Thomas the Train,
mm.
the Easter Bunny, all of these different things, but we cut off animism once they get to a certain age.
Oh, yeah.
But the magic and where kids are their most creative, and their intelligence, like there's been studies
Mm,
on IQ and intelligence and creativity with children. It's at the ages when they are allowed to believe that everything is alive.
yeah. Yeah, and it's nice to see animism kind of coming back into our experience. I speak to more and more people who are identifying as being animists, but it's definitely a change of consciousness
Mm-hmm.
from this materialistic world that we live in. And it's, that's kind of the challenge. But when you look at the materialism, it's a dead end.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of what happens, maybe we can talk just a little bit about the alchemical process,
Mm-hmm.
is that people get blocked and we block
Mm-hmm.
ourselves often. And sometimes we don't even know how we're blocking ourselves. I had a really good example, which I cannot remember, but there was something that it was in regards to money and something that I would
Mm-hmm.
say about money all the time. And then I
Mm-hmm.
just like, wait a minute. Why am I saying it like this? And it was like I could see how it was preventing things in my life.
Mm-hmm.
The one I can be specific about was I've had a problem. I was looking for full-time work for a
Mm-hmm.
long time and I was unsuccessful. I would always end up being like the second choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking on the phone with a friend of mine, and she was like, I'm so sorry this keeps happening to you. And it just clicked. As soon as I heard her say that, I'm like, I don't want to hear that. That's
Mm-hmm.
not what I want. I don't want
Yeah.
you to feel sorry for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be a little bit crude here, but I realized I was kind of getting off on that,
Yeah.
on the sympathy and everything.
Yeah.
And so it was, we have to recognize these sort of unconscious things.
Yeah.
But that's hard because they're unconscious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how I found your book so useful because, and I also want to add that your book can be used without the sacred medicines, without the plant
Yes.
medicines.
That's the point. I mean, the
Yeah.
reality is there's a lot of people out there taking medicine that aren't actually doing the
Yeah.
work with it.
Yeah.
And this is about the work. So, what you're talking about, I've seen this happen many times and it can show up in many different ways, but a lot of times it's like there's a sense of safety in playing small.
Yeah.
There's a security blanket in playing small. If I take off the veil, I'm
Yeah.
going to be naked. I'm going to be exposed. I'm going to be
Mhm.
vulnerable. I have to take a risk. I have to
Yeah.
fully, expose myself. And many people are really terrified of that.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of it roots down many times more often than not into programming from age 0 to 7. I talk
Hmm.
about that in the individuated consciousness chapter. And it's this idea that, you're basically in this hypnotic state between 0 and 7, where you're recording everything. And it was designed as humans to be a way that we could learn really quickly so that the things that we didn't have to keep relearning could be on autopilot. But the problem is that our society got so disconnected from nature, from love, from, many things from our authentic selves, our authentic truth that we essentially kept, the best way to say it is it's a Cree word called Wetiko, which
Oh
means
yeah.
the mind virus. So
Yeah.
we just essentially pass the mind virus down to each of our children. So now our job is essentially you have this computer code, you're operating on Windows 1980, essentially. That's like your lens of perception in the world, whatever version of it you have that was passed down from your family. And you're literally having to go through the programming code. And the way that you work on the programming code is you have to separate out the program. Specifically for you, it was around this, wanting to get the sympathy from others. It was also about, whatever programming was, it could have been like just self-destructive programming of like, I want this job, but I'm not worthy of this job because,
Yeah.
you know, who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
your dad said to you that you weren't good enough when you were a child one time when you were doing a
Yeah.
sport, and then that got recorded into your subconscious memory, whatever it was. It's like you go into that piece of coding, and that piece of coding can be many different things. It can be your inner child, it can show up as emotions, it can show up as scenes in a movie of specific things when you remembered it for the first time that it occurred. And the idea of the alchemical process is giving that thing enough love and attention, which is different for every single thing. It could be 15 minutes, it could be 15 years, but giving that piece enough love and attention that at some point it changes. And you won't even know that it's changed when it's changed. And that's the alchemical turning the negredo, the fixed, into the unfixed. And we do this by utilizing different tools, intuitive tools, psychedelics, breath work, journaling practice, tapping into our plant guides, like we were talking about, all of these different things. We kind of, look at the toolkit. And that's why it's so beautiful when you're on this path, you start to kind of gather this nice little tool belt of all the different things. And I talk about a lot of the tools in the book so that people can kind of double click on things that they might want to study more
Yeah.
about. And so then you bring those different tools in there and you're working on that piece, and eventually you have some kind of breakthrough or understanding about it because you've given it love and presence. It almost like starts to speak to you. And sometimes I even tell people, if it's something that's really persistent, bring it into your dreams. Like before you go to bed, ask about it, journal about it, like work on it for a set period of time until you feel like you've collected a lot of information about it to where you understand what it smells like, what it tastes like, when it shows up. Some of these things are landmine things. Like when you're feeling good about yourself, if you are getting enough exercise, if you're getting enough sleep, if you're not going out drinking at night, which sometimes we go through periods where we're less disciplined, and you went and did those job interviews, it might have been a whole nother story, but that little part of you might get triggered at times when you're not feeling like fully on your game.
Yeah.
Like we all go through cycles up and down, and I feel like astrology kind of, cycles in our life, like they talk about Saturn returns,
Yeah.
and your Chiron returns, which is usually like age 57. All of these cycles in life, sometimes it just like brings more of these things up to the surface. So these are just ways that we can work with what's showing up in life and hopefully move it in a positive way. But really, more than anything, it's how we go into our inner landscape. It's how we don't get lost in there, how we don't
Yeah.
feel stuck in there. And, there's so much learning and so much studying to master any of these tools. I wanted to assemble things in a way that would allow people to understand these are all the different pieces, if you put it together, kind of represent what would be a container of transformation, what would be a arc of
Mm,
how we do this work with ourselves that in a way is initiatic.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for all of that. And the conclusion I came up to for me personally was these just weren't the right jobs. I was, I was looking at all the wrong things.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is important as well, and you write about this quite a bit in the book, is you've been talking about attention to things, but also intention.
Hmm.
And I found that the suggestions you gave in the book for really working with the medicines or working with the journaling or whatnot
Hmm.
were better than the intentions that, like, I'm used to, like, oh, I want to work on this, just
Hmm.
kind of identifying something. But the intentions that you gave seemed to me to be take you further and deeper.
Hmm.
And it left me thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to do the next time I work with the medicine. This is the
Hmm.
approach. This is how to do it. And so I actually would like to make copies of that and just give it to anyone who's working with plant medicines and say, this is the approach to take.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I really feel when I sit with someone, especially with Iboga, because it's such a deep initiatic experience that, we sit in an interview and we do multiple interviews where we're really dialing in, why did you come here? Really?
Mm,
Why?
yeah.
And how are we going to how are we going to help you to get the most from this experience? And really like refining the language so that you're really clear. Because I feel like the universe is here to support our needs,
Mm,
but we're just not communicating them clear enough.
yeah.
And that also goes with what we're communicating, which are the subconscious things that we're communicating. And so, I think the more that we can get refined in our intentions and be
Yeah.
intentional throughout our lives, which really comes with presence and connection to our heart,
Yeah.
ultimately that we start to really manifest beautiful things. And I think the more people collectively that
Yeah.
are doing that, I think the more beautiful than our hearts, more beautiful world than our
Yeah.
hearts know is
Yeah. Yeah.
possible
Yeah. Yeah.
can manifest. Because it's like, I truly believe we're all on this consciousness where we wake up in the morning and we expect a certain reality.
Mm,
But there is a potential that if enough people decide that they want to wake up to a different reality, that
mm,
that's going to happen. And I think that the like we talked about the cycles that we're in and how we're kind of in this transformational cycle. And if you look at it, I talk about this in the inner verse and the universe, which is talking
mm,
a lot about like different archetypal things related to planets, but also the planetary cycles, like the yuga cycles,
yeah.
which are, talked about in the Vedas.
Mm,
And essentially, these cycles, historically, we have been very far from the galactic center. If you were
mm,
to take all the planets and kind of structure this tree of life that represents kind of the web of life, of power, and that power being the capacity for individuals to embody consciousness, to
mm,
essentially be like that Tibetan sponge crawl. We are much closer to the central source of power than we've ever been, meaning that if you look at the historical ancient text, many of these modalities were designed so that individuals could become enlightened in this lifetime. So they
yeah.
would be literally living in a cave, doing mantras, in these deep disciplines, like not even living in the world, to be able to embody a certain level of consciousness. Now, we don't have to work as hard to do that. But we also have this incredible opportunity in that to all collectively spread that together,
Yeah.
because we were in this paradigm where a lot of us lived in a different era. Like we went through this change,
Mm,
and now we're in this different energetic signature where the planets have shifted and the capacity for us to connect to consciousness is much
mm,
higher and to have synchronicity, but we're still like our subconscious mind still thinks
yeah.
like it's like imagine that you woke up and it's like Back to the Future, and you were in record player land, and all of a sudden you're in like MP3s and all digital, and you're like, wait, what just happened here? But we were the frog in the pot of boiling water. We didn't realize it, but
Yeah.
now we're in this era from a consciousness perspective where our ability to interface with consciousness is so much easier and faster,
Mm,
but we still think we're in the old paradigm. We still think we've got a
yeah.
record player.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that things are changing. Things are, I think, the rest of the century is going to be amazing. And of course, there's going to be, a roller coaster, but it's going to be very interesting. I know we're getting close to the end here, but there were just a couple other things I wanted to touch on very quickly. And one is kind of going back to this idea of the power that we all have,
Mm-hmm.
that we often don't recognize. And that for me, that's how I define spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
is being in touch with that life force. And it feels like so many of us are cut off from it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we need to do. And there's this sense of never being good enough
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people. And I know I'm going to slaughter the pronunciation here, but it's the Japanese art, I'll just do it that way, of like a broken dish that you
Mm-hmm.
take it and put it back together with gold, and it then
Mm-hmm.
becomes something that's more beautiful. And it seems to me that that is a crucial lesson for most of us to learn, because you also note, and I always think this is the best advice to give, that one of the best places that we have to start with is being kind to ourselves.
Yes.
Instead of thinking, oh, I'm this broken thing, recognize that, oh, I'm this thing of beauty.
Yes. And what you're talking about is called kintsugi.
Yes, thank you.
And when you look at the kind of value and aesthetic of Japanese culture, which I think is just, you know, if you go to Japan, the cities are clean.
Yeah.
People in society are helping each other. Literally, people will send their children off out in the city and not worry about them, like, because all the elders will make sure they're safe on the subway.
Mm,
But the idea of it is in the basis of this core kind of spiritual aesthetic called wabi sabi, which is finding beauty in
mm,
imperfection. And I think really that's the gift of nature.
yeah.
Nature, like if you look at the culture in Japan, there's the art of forest bathing, the
Hmm.
idea that going and laying in the forest has a sacred quality to it. And so when you look at the idea of kintsugi, of, an art, it being an art, the first thing is that each step of this process is sacred. So think of this as your spiritual journey.
Mm,
Here you are putting yourself back together. How sacred is that? It's an art. You're making a work of art. So
yeah.
you approach it in this way of setting up your space of, you get your different supplies, which are the glue, the different pieces, and you start by looking at this map here of who you are and putting these different pieces together. And who you are happens through the inner alchemy because you've taken that part of you, which is one of those little broken pieces of that plate, and you've looked at it and you've understood it. And as you've started to do this throughout your life, you start to see this plate that is your landscape, your inner landscape
Mm,
of your map of your inner cosmos. And each one of those pieces, if you were to like go into the feelings of it, some of them are unhealed. You might feel like very small. You might
Mm.
feel very like a victim. You might feel a grief. You might feel
Mm.
incapable, all of these things. And it's still in itself part of something bigger and greater that,
Yeah.
yeah, when you isolate it, it might be something that might be seen as negative. But when you look at it in the whole map of everything, it's actually
Mm.
something really beautiful. And so
Mm.
as you start to reclaim these pieces of yourself through the work with plant medicine, through the work with all of these other different modalities, getting back into your ancestry, your daily practice, just taking care of yourself, even through choosing to live authentically
Yeah.
and connected to your soul, living a soul led life and honoring your truth, speaking up for yourself, being really honest with all people. These pieces start to come back together. And so the glue is the
Mm.
work that you're doing. You're pulling these pieces back together. But then you've got a plate, but the real gift, and this is what makes kintsugi magical, is that you paint the gold in those cracks. So you've
Mm.
sanded down all the, rough edges from the glue and you paint that gold. And I really believe that gold is our self-love. It's like
Mm.
every day that we are able to see the imperfections within ourselves and still see the beauty and to just fully love ourselves. And that includes the other, because
Mm.
everything you see imperfect in the other is actually a reflection of yourself.
Mm.
And so the more that we connect to love, the more that we connect to our hearts and still honor our truth and
Right.
still honor our soul and our soul's intelligence to lead us, trusting our soul, even though we're not going to know everything.
Yeah.
And we have to step into the unknown many times, but we keep painting that gold. And what we're left with is this work of art, which is the kintsugi.
Yeah. No, I love that. And as you were speaking, what I was thinking about is to kind of go back, and that idea of the inner and the outer is
Mm,
that I know at one point in the book you wrote something along the lines that so many of us don't even know our souls,
mm,
that they're kind of lost to us. And often I think there's this looking down on them, it's this diminishment of it. And it's like,
mm,
well, when we do that, of course the world's going to be a horrible, awful, diminished place. But then when we repair ourselves, that's how we fix the world and
mm.
make it, return it to a thing of beauty.
Yeah. And if people are going into the journey of this work wanting to end suffering, the best way to end suffering is to start letting your soul lead, because it's the
Mm.
ego that
Yeah.
suffers, not the
Yeah.
soul. The
Right.
soul can like go through a hurricane and be attacked by
Hmm.
wild animals and all kinds of things and still be completely in
Yeah.
connection and love. And like you said, when you came to the conclusion that those job interviews were not the right job for you, there was like a sense of knowing in yourself that was
Yeah.
like that I needed to have that experience to
Mm.
know that
Yeah.
my soul was leading the way,
Oh
that I
yeah.
was making the right choice. Sometimes, you have to have those contrasts
Hmm.
to be able to make the right choice, you
Oh yeah.
know. So, yeah, I mean, in Bwiti, one initiation that I've done 4 times is called Mumbayano.
Mm.
And Mumbayano basically means it's like your Kundalini. So in
Mm.
the cosmology of Bwiti, it is believed that your soul is your Kundalini. So there's different expressions of that serpent traveling up your spine. And those are representative of different archetypes. Typically in all Bwiti initiations every lineage that I've been connected with, you get what's called a kumbo. And your kumbo is the name of your soul.
Mm,
Your name of your soul is different than the name of you in the human world.
right.
In many of the lineages that I've been initiated, it's customary that you introduce yourself to the spirit world using your given name.
Mm,
If you're a woman and you're married, you use your maiden name, your mother's name, using her maiden name as well, and your father's full name. And that's like your address. So that's how the ancestors and the spirits find you in the physical world. Like, oh, here, over here is Nick, and
yeah.
here's his body. We need to find him. Okay, he's right there. That's how we were able to locate him.
Mm,
It's like GPS,
yeah.
it's like the coordinates, the Google coordinates on the map. But your ano or your combo, your spirit name is what you use in ceremony because that's where your power is. And so, there's many people that are initiated over many years and they'll actually have multiple
Mm,
combos. Like I have multiple combos. And sometimes they are really healing for you in that phase of your life. They always stay with you forever, but sometimes you need to connect to that archetypal energy at that phase in your life. But what's really, I think, the gift of it is that in the initiation, at least in the Mumbayano initiation, you have to carry around a lantern.
mm,
And that lantern is a representation of your soul. And you take it everywhere you go. If you have to go to the bathroom, it comes with you. If you go to make yourself a plate of food, your lantern goes with you. If anyone in the village sees you without your lantern, you get in trouble. Like you are scolded. It's like,
mm,
wait, where's your soul? You can't
yeah.
walk around without your soul. It's what are you thinking?
Mm,
And it's that idea of, creating that connection with your soul that is unbreakable. And one thing that's unique about the lineage of Bwiti that I'm most connected with is that after you do these initiations, anytime you get a new kumbo, you see your Mumbayano. Your Mumbayano has a costume.
mm,
Like it's actually its real outfit. Like, one of the Nima are the initiators and Bwiti. His Mombayano is King Akhenaten from
mm.
Egypt. So he literally is wearing like a headdress, like a pharaoh, and full on like Egyptian clothing. And so you go to a traditional Gabonese tailor, you have your costume made, and you always wear it in ceremony, and it's like
Mm,
a consecrated outfit. It's
mm,
like made for you to bring in the powers
mm.
of that archetype.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. And you noted in the book because you've mentioned initiations, and I've heard this many times that one of the issues in especially Western culture is that we just don't have these initiatory experiences anymore.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when you look at all of these ancient wisdom cultures, there's many different kind of core aspects of initiation which are completely missing from our culture. But I think the most important thing is that, you're in isolation. It's like some form of sensory deprivation through
Mm,
certain diets, through certain practices. And then a lot of times it's about this inner reflection and inner review, which is essentially like an integration.
mm,
So that could be almost like a confession. Like in one of the lineages of Bwiti, we do actual kind of confessions, and it's kind of like in Polynesian, tradition and different
mm,
Hawaiian culture, there's like Ho'oponopono, which is, a forgiveness prayer.
right.
And you use this forgiveness prayer for clearing. And in Bwiti, we use these confessions essentially, things we've done to ourselves, things we've done to others. And we use all these things to clean ourselves. And I would say in Western culture, we don't go through these periods of time where we fast from stimulation, where we fast from sex, where we fast from food, and where we are tested, beyond our capacity. And I feel like because of that, we become lazy. Like if you stare at a computer screen all day, hey, I didn't used to wear glasses. I have to wear glasses now. My eyesight has changed from that. But if I was to go out in the jungle and probably spend a month out in the jungle, I probably wouldn't need to wear them anymore. It would like reattune my
Mm.
eyes to things. And so, yeah, I really believe that a lot of the suffering that we have in our culture, like have you ever do you do contrast therapy?
No.
So that's where you get into a cold plunge, usually anywhere
Oh,
from
okay.
52 to 35 degrees, usually for anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes. You don't
Mm.
really need to be in there for more than two.
Yeah.
And then, you can do sauna, like something
Yeah. Yeah.
hot.
I have done that.
So you have done it.
Yeah, I just didn't know that was the name. Yeah. A slight variation of it, but yes, there's some hot springs in southern Colorado that I like. And I've also done this at the Esalen Institute. They have
Yeah.
the baths. And instead of plunging into something, I just kind of walk around naked in the nice cold ocean air. And then I get back into the tubs, or the same thing down in southern Colorado. So
Y-
yeah.
Yeah, jumping into a cold river, but it's about this like kind of sensory, like when you look at, I did a 10-day Vipassana many years ago where you were in silence and, in that particular meditation, the whole focus on it is, you know, not craving
Mm.
something, not pulling something towards you, but also not pushing something away from you. Like, oh,
Right.
I don't like the feeling of that. That's uncomfortable.
Mm.
But just like really being with what is. And I feel like contrast therapy can really help with that as well, because it's like forcing yourself to go in the cold, even though you feel uncomfortable, and then going into the extreme hot. Like I like to do 107, 185 to 200 degrees
Mm.
in the sauna, 15, 20 minutes, and then do 2 to 3 minutes of cold. And I usually do that in like three
Yeah.
cycles. But it's things like that where, like, if we start bringing those things into our culture, I mean, the studies of what it does to the heart,
Mm.
which our heart is so important. That's
Mm.
how we connect to love,
Yeah.
how it helps the heart health, how it helps the brain health, how it really resets the dopamine in the brain. And our brains are so off kilter from cell phone use and
Yeah.
social media and just kind of the way that our culture works, which is just like moving way too fast. So I believe that we need to either create a society where we are doing specific initiatic things, things that put us into those situations, and obviously in a way that's not going to kill people,
Right.
but also like tapping into these other initiatic cultures in a respectful way, I think can also be really beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And like I said before, I think we're going into an initiatory, or maybe we're in the middle of an initiatory process, but it
Mhm.
would help to have the ritual to kind of move us along. So I know that we are pretty much out of time, unfortunately, but let me ask you the final questions, which are, what are you working on next? And
Mm.
where can people go to find out more about you and your work?
What am I working on next? This is something I've been working on for a while, and it is so deep to my heart and soul. So, as someone who has had a nonprofit, my website is Ancestral Heart, and I've been really focused on indigenous-led reciprocity, a lot of it being with the Bwiti for Iboga conservation, preserving the equatorial rainforests of Gabon, but also working really closely with the Kogi Kagaba, which are in Colombia, in
Mm.
Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, which I feel are one of the most profound indigenous tribes, because the Mamus, who are the kind of priests of the tradition, kind of like the Nima are for the Bwiti, spend 9 years in darkness. At least 9 years. I've met Mamus that spent 27 years
Wow.
in darkness.
Yeah.
And, I feel that, the work that we have to do right now in our society, there's a quickening and there are prophecies from the Kogi that state that, like, right now we're kind of in this period that is kind of the darkest of the
Mm.
dark. And that's like started in June of this year, and then we'll go through 2026.
Mm.
And, they've warned that we could lose like 30% of the
Wow.
biodiversity of the planet. So the work that I've really done is shift my focus into how do we get indigenous wisdom keepers that actually understand what's happening on the planet and how to tend to nature and not create these like side effects like
Mm.
what we're doing with carbon credits and
Yeah.
all these strange regulations that we don't really know actually work when we're
Yeah.
like headed off a cliff in
Mm.
terms of the environment. And so it's been like really focusing in on putting these indigenous leaders into forums of power and where they can have their voices be uplifted. And you can learn more about that on my website, Ancestral Heart. One of the things that I've created because, we've been doing projects since 2015, and every time we do a new project, you have to go out and ask for money.
Mm.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting to be going out and being like, oh, we needed $25,000 to build this estuary research center in partnership with Harvard that is going to be Kogi's teaching the indigenous knowledge of the birds of the Amazon so that there can be a greater understanding of how we can conserve the birds, which are such a vital part of, the ecosystem of the Amazon, and seed spreaders and so many different things. And so when I was at G20 in 2023, this idea came through called ancestral stewardship payments. And it's the
Mm.
idea of like a new form, which I think is starting. Like, I was just with a group of people. We crossed the ocean for 11 days together, kind of in this incredible mastermind, like 400 people. And I literally just got home this last week. And there was like more people than I've ever met that were kind of in the same field of consciousness. Like, how do we figure this out? And, now we're calling these like biocultural preservation credits. And so
Mm.
it's the understanding of how do we transition the market in from carbon credits to these systems that essentially assign a value, which unfortunately, carbon, in my opinion, isn't necessarily the best dictator of health
Right.
of a rainforest. Like for example, in La Sierra Nevada, you can actually measure the health of the jungle by how many tapir you see because they're a keystone species. Or
Mm.
if you're looking at Ecuador, it would be jaguars.
Mm.
If there's a lot of jaguars in an area, then it mean, so really we need to relook at these systems, and that's why it's great to get so many people together to create these systems. So we've created this system and we call it a payment
Mm.
because in the Kogi tradition, you don't you make offerings to nature, and this is
Mm.
very common in all traditions that the way that we create balance between man and nature is by giving offerings back.
Mm.
It's always your first and your best. And it's because, everything belongs to Creator.
Mm.
And so essentially the air that we breathe, the water we drink, the food that we eat, everything essentially belongs to Creator, whether that's Mother Creator or Father Creator. And so we make offerings to acknowledge that. And the Kogi, that's what they do for humanity. The Kogi make pagamentos, payments to
Mm.
nature. And essentially, it's believed, and I truly believe this is true, that these payments prevent natural disasters from
Mm.
happening, like volcanoes from blowing up and hurricanes and, all of these things. And so it's a big task, but it's the idea like, how do we create a system that is actually scalable, that can incentivize and create a market that basically allows the indigenous people to do what they do best.
Right.
I mean, if you look at, 8% of the planet is indigenous people, and they manage 80% of the biodiversity of
Yeah.
the planet. So that's pretty significant. So if we were going to look at like tipping points of like where do you want to spend your most time to prevent climate collapse, in my opinion, it's like solving for that. So
Yeah.
that's like the biggest thing. And the other thing is that maybe this is a moonshot idea, but there's a part of me deep in my soul that says that we can't live in a planet with the current capitalistic system
Mm,
and survive, because even if we all, become more conscious, we're still working against a system that actually doesn't promote consciousness, yet it
right.
is the standard currency of our world. Because everything that's done, if you want to create something, if you want to be a creator and you want that to reach people, that's your heart, your soul, what you're passionate
Mm,
about, you have to go and get VC money or bank
mm,
money.
yeah.
And then you have to, this is the way you answer. And it's like, it's soul crushing. And so the next phase is like, really, how do we change the way that business is done and make it based on these core original principles, these primordial
Mhm,
principles that people connect with in mystical experiences, or, they would be called indigenous original principles that go across every
mm,
indigenous tradition. Or if you go into the Kemetic traditions, it would be like the 42 ideals of Ma'at, which
yeah.
are what give you a light heart. So how do you incorporate that into a model and shepherd individuals to create something that is fully protected, where they get support and resources, and also they're protected so that no hostile takeovers? Because, like, I've seen B Corps
Mm,
be taken over and converted in hostile takeovers. I've seen purpose.org, like stewardship organizations, which seems like a very foolproof model, be co-opted
mm,
into something else. And it's all about greed and money. And we
mm,
can't have money and profit be the KPI. Otherwise, we're screwed. We have
yeah.
to we have to change the orientation.
Yeah.
So
And I
yeah,
think
that's what
that's,
I'm working on.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that's an issue with the plant medicines as well. Venture capitalists have their eyes on them. So,
Yes.
yeah, it's something we have to be very cautious and mindful of. Well,
Yes.
Tricia, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation
Thank
and I
you.
applaud you for the work that you've done and are doing. I am always very grateful for people who work on healing because the world needs it
Mm.
and making it a better place. And again, I did love your book. I'm going to be using it as much as I can and recommending it to everyone. I will also put links for the book and your website in the show notes in the video description so that people can find them more easily. So, anyway, I thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Nick. You're just such a dream to connect with, and just really excited to stay connected. Can't wait to meet you in Colorado.
Oh, yeah. MAPS conference coming up.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a wrap on episode 178 of Rebel Spirit Radio. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you're part of my YouTube audience. Now, longtime listeners know what's coming up next. All the usual. Sign up for my Patreon, share this with friends and family, and on social media too, please. And subscribe to or follow the podcast on whatever platform you use to listen to or view podcasts. I know you know the drill. But the thing is, all of that is really important. Sharing, subscribing, or following, these are all free. And it only takes a few seconds of your time, and they really do help. Right now, putting together this podcast is a labor of love, and I do love it. I'm in the process of trying to make changes to improve the podcast and the YouTube channel. It's slow going, very slow going, but your support will help me speed up the process and ensure that I can continue the podcast and offer much more content than what I provide now. So I always like to say I'm here in the Front Range now doing missionary work in regards to religion, spirituality and ecology, consciousness and the esoteric, and how all of this can help us heal humanity's sacred relationship with the living earth. So if you feel moved by the rebel spirit, and I sure hope that you do, then please, by all means, help me in my efforts to share the good news. I'm Nick Mather, and you've been listening to or watching Rebel Spirit Radio. Until next time, may you be in peace, may you flourish in all possible ways, and may you continue to nurture your rebel spirit.